Hey guys, a little explanation video on fitting an M60 or M62 oil pump to the kit that various companies offer in order to fit this BMW V8 to an E36 or E46 chassis. There's a couple of things you really need to see before you understand them. The instructions aren't very clear and the English in the instructions isn't really great. So I hope this video is of some benefit to somebody. It's not something I would do myself per se, but the alternative is dry sump, which makes this engine way too expensive. So the first thing you're going to be doing is disassembling the oil pump, taking out all the bolts that hold it together. Makes kind of sense which ones go where, but it would be nice to keep track of them obviously and keep everything nice and clean because it is an oil pump. And it's super important to keep your stuff clean and organized. So the whole deal with these kits is that you're flipping around the oil pump, because in the original position the oil pump sits exactly where the steering rack is on an E36 E46, and the people who design these kits have a couple tricks to move that oil pump around. The impeller shaft is the first thing you're going to be changing, so you're taking that out. Obviously be very careful with it because it's a delicate part. Super important how all that stuff fits, and as some of you guys can see, that's also the piece where the sprocket goes in the front that's driven by the chain. And as you can see, there's a certain offset that needs to be changed, so the sprocket needs to go on a different position of the impeller shaft, and it's going to be 17.4 to 17.9 millimeters. If you measure the original position, as you guys can see over here, that's a lot different, so that's 20 millimeters and a little bit, so you need to press it. For that we're using a BV socket, so an impact socket, and a hydraulic press, and it's a kind of a tedious process. It feels really wrong if you're doing it, but it kind of works, and this is gonna determine how far your sprocket sits and if it lines up with the chain of the M60. And that means that you'll kind of have to like try different things, so we're just going for a 17.5 millimeter offset in this case and see where that puts our sprocket. The next thing you're supposed to do is remove the oil pressure release valve. You should Google what this thing exactly does, because otherwise it would become a huge video. You remove the clip that holds it in, the little ring over here. For that, of course, you need the special pliers, and you take out this whole assembly. And the reason why you're doing that is because it's going to go into a T-piece that's provided in the kit that moves everything around, and you'll need to chamfer this hole over here, and we're going to show you guys later how that's exactly done, because it's going to have a different function. Keep all this stuff organized, obviously, super important. Make sure that this is all very nice and clean. That's also a tip with anything else with M60 or M50. Make sure that that valve is never stuck, because it's the same system that an M50 or anything else uses. And you're going to have to increase that side because there's a bushing that's going to go in there, and that's 15.8 right now. And we're going to be drilling that to a bigger size in order to fit a bushing that comes with the kit. It's super important that you put this part of the oil pump flat when you're starting to drill it. In this case we used a couple aluminum blocks. You really need to keep an eye on it. It would be nicer to do this with a lathe and machine it, of course. That's what it looks like after the drilling. Of course we cleaned it up a little bit so it looks a little nicer and chamfered. Yeah, keep that stuff obviously very clean. Keep all the drill the debris from the drilling and all this stuff out, and deburr it nicely, and that's the piece that you're going to be putting in. Obviously it's written in the instructions which size drill you're going to be using and stuff, and that needs to be pressed in, and it needs to be pressed in so it completely sits flush with the edge that sticks out. I always kind of like trying like manually putting this in like a little bit. It wasn't really easy. So yeah, there you can see the sleeve sits on the same surface height as that edge over there, and it also needs to be done in a press. So make sure that you get a good start, that it doesn't go in crooked, or that you're applying pressure when it's not seated completely. Be really gentle with it. Again, you can see the machined blocks that we're using to ensure that it's going to go in straight, and just keep pressing, and at one point you'll just feel that you're doing it right. And here is that T piece that comes in the kit with little O-rings, and you're going to put the pressure release valve in there. As you can see, it's kind of like a copy, and that other piece that sticks out now is going to go into the block. You need to chamfer that part over there where that cover used to be before, and the reason for that is that otherwise the O-rings won't go in really well. It's pretty obvious in the description. I think you could get away with not doing it, but it's just going to be way easier. You don't want to damage those O-rings. It's not a standard size, so just be careful. Chamfer that like in the instructions, and then that piece should go in. Obviously lube it a little bit with oil and stuff so it goes in easier, and because that's going to be a super important part. And yeah, like there you go, it's a little easier to insert the O-rings if you chamfer that piece with a drill. It's kind of a good idea to keep fitting the body of the oil pump to the pan that comes with the kit. As you can see, you need to cut off quite a lot. You need to cut off ribs of it, and almost all the surfaces on this side and the side that I'm holding up need to be substantially trimmed. And there's okay photos of that. There you can see, and it's just a lot easier if you have the piece in your hand. Keep trimming that and keep fitting it into the oil pan until it starts to look correct. And it's a lot of trimming. Definitely you need to cut a lot of material off. Definitely way more work than it seems. And there you're removing about 5 millimeters of that whole section. There you can see that top section. There you go. That's where it all comes off, and just keep measuring it and take your time doing it. And then yeah, Brian put everything, he took everything off over here, as you can see, because it sits super close to the pan over there, and it's also going to determine the angle. So even if it may fit, it may still tilt the pump in the wrong direction. It's just a little fiddly, the same as the mounting points, because they're just long nuts that are welded into the aftermarket sump. You just need to fiddle around with it a little bit until the holes line up. In our case, one of the mounting feet really needed to be opened up. That's where you're going to be putting in the pressure release valve again. Keep everything nice and clean. Obviously when you're cutting off all these things, there you go, the pressure relief valve goes in. Obviously when you're cutting all this stuff off, make sure the debris and all the little pieces of dirt are taken out. It's actually kind of a nice system, but it's just like, it seems a little homemade. Like that's a nice thing you press in there. On the other side where that pressure relief valve thing was before, and there Brian has removed even more material there. The standard M8 bolts didn't really work for us, and the reason for that is that you can't get a socket around it. So you either need to use an Allen or a Torx, or in our case we found some bolts. They're not in this video actually, this is just Brian fitting it for the first time, but we found, there you can see, that's not great, and it's also risking you to put them in crooked or the wrong way around. So we found a couple of M8 bolts that have a smaller head, so you can use a smaller socket. That's them right there. Definitely a good idea to do that, and you just need to keep fitting it and trying around with it, and then fit the pan to the motor and line it all up correctly. And you need to be, it's kind of fiddly to fit the chain on it, and you just need to work around with it with washers and stuff a little bit to put the correct tension on there. It's definitely important. That took us a lot of time to get the tension on the chain correct. So it's a little bit fiddly. I totally understand the idea, and it's very ingenious to make something like this. On the other hand, it's also a little less straightforward than the instructions. You really need to kind of have a feeling for what you're doing. There's a lot of small things that you can do wrong that will mess this up. I'm not a huge fan of mounting an oil pump to the oil pan. I think that should all be stuck to the motor, because the chain drive and everything is also stuck to the motor, so it should kind of like move with that. And of course, an oil pan has like gaskets and all kinds of things that could be variable. So it's ingenious, but definitely be super careful. Double check, triple check, and take your time.